And welcome to the rebooted version of the podcast. This is Ben Wolf with the official podcast of Wolf's Edge Integrators. I am pleased to be talking about what is the right COO, number two leader, or integrator profile that you need for your right number two leader. And depending on which type of number two leader you need, that might be a different answer. And we're going to get into all of that with my guest today, who is Alec Broadfoot. He is the founder and CEO of VisionSpark and is the author of Hiring Your Right Number Two Leader. And I'm very happy to welcome you today, Alex, to talk about this topic. Good to have you.
Yeah, great to be here, Ben.
Awesome. And what I want to get into, if you can, before we get too far, is if you could please share just like a 2 minute background about how you got into this, how you got into be where you are, and talking about what we're talking about today.
Yeah. So about 20 years ago, I had a mailing and printing company. We processed mail for large companies in Columbus, including Chase. We processed several 100,000 pieces of mail a day, and we were just killing it. Nominated for Entrepreneurs of the Year, putting some of our smaller competitors out of business because we were just really good, really fast. We would pick up mail at our clients in the afternoon, have it process the mail by the evening. We had two shifts, and we were just humming. And except we couldn't hire well, and we were firing about 7 out of 10 people, and
Wow.
it just was not going well. And so I reached out to one of my mentors in desperation. He's like, "Alec, are you using any sort of science or an assessment tool in your hiring?" And I'm like, no, what's that? And so we started using an assessment tool, and it transformed our hiring. And we went from instead of firing 7 out of 10 people, we were retaining 7 out of 10 people. We needed a front office assistant at the time. And this one particular woman just knocked the interview out of the ballpark. Mind you, I did not know how to interview back then. Like if I knew what I knew then, she would never have made it. But I was one of those where I liked her, thought she was a cultural fit. She had a decent background. And I had her take that assessment, and the results were horrible. And I'm like, that can't be true. Really good interview. So I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to check her references. And again, I didn't know how to ask reference questions either. So, and I checked her references, and they were all good. So we hired her, and everything the assessment said that was going to happen was spot on. The assessment said she was going to be an extremely slow learner, be very insecure, make a lot of mistakes, not be reliable. Said that she would be a social butterfly. Like everything was on the assessment, and I'm like, and I even asked the reference questions. Some of them, those questions, concerns I had, and they're like, no, she's great. And sure enough, the assessment was spot on. So I said, never again. So I was in a peer group at the time, and I saw my colleagues making the same hiring mistakes. And so that was the beginning of me starting to have a passion to help entrepreneurs hire with science and data. And fast forward a few years, I started VisionSpark at the end of 2011 with the desire to help entrepreneurs use science and a process, especially when it comes to hiring key leaders.
That's awesome. Well, look, it's great context. I was, maybe a few weeks ago, a month ago, I read your book, Hiring Your Right Number Two Leader. Spent a Saturday doing that, and I remember that story you just told from the book. So I appreciate that. It's a great illustration. I love also you're just like, that can't be right. I've definitely done that with assessments before. Like, that's not right. Just ignore it. It's like there's got to be a mistake there somewhere. The I guess what I'm hoping to get into together is so the first thing I want to ask you about is, I think this is going to really help people who are watching or listening to this is to understand, first of all, your talent impact profile, your TIP, talent impact profile assessment that you use when helping people hire for roles, right? And knowing how to put some science into that. What are the benchmarks and qualities that are needed, that are not needed, that are important, that are not important for different kinds of roles? I want to transition into some of the discoveries that we've made, and anybody following me or Wolf's Edge Integrators or some of our partners out there in the space as well, starting to adopt some of this language of the three types of number two leaders, the three types of COOs that we've articulated, and start to see how that tip profile and how those benchmarks and what you might be looking for might be different depending on which type of number two leader or integrator or COO that you need. And of course, I mean, the tip is useful in other kinds of roles too, not just number two leaders.
Yes, it's useful in any position. Yeah.
Okay, so you can help, and this is not only executive positions, in other words.
Yes. It's executive, middle managers, even rank and file. It works really well as for that too. I mean, we've had some clients reduce tremendous turnover by using it for their rank and file employees.
Awesome. Yeah, and I used it with one of my clients when we were testing and validating a potential in-house candidate for number two for integrator at their company. We use a tip profile. I went through the whole process there. I really found it very insightful and very helpful. And so, tell me about tell me about the tip profile, right? Tell me about how does that work? How is it used? What, what is the way practically that somebody can have a more data or objective based approach rather than just relying on their gut and their, kind of conversational interview style that they might have?
Yeah. So the talent impact profile, or the tip, there's three. When you get the report, you're going to get a set of three different scores. So I'll start with the bottom score. It's gonna measure someone's how honest were they, how candid were they when they took the assessment. So did they tell you what you wanted to hear? Did they read the job description and try to take the assessment to match it? So there's actually some questions in there that can determine someone's mindset. So if they were embellishing or exaggerating their responses, which is really cool, especially in this era of AI. So it
How does
has,
it do that? How can you fish that out?
yeah, without giving too much, because we have some candidates listening, but there are questions that are hidden in there. So we have some secret questions in there. And based on experience and data, we can tell based on how they answer those questions, how true and honest they are with themselves. And so we know that it impacts some of the other scores. So it's really interesting. You probably would believe that most salespeople that take it tend to embellish a little bit more than the average candidate, right? So, and then the other components, it measures cognitive. So someone's their mental acuity, their learning style, their vocabulary, their attention to detail, their ability to work with numbers. So it measures mental aptitudes. And then it measures their personality. So it's affective. So personality dimensions, the way we like to think of it, is what behaviors can predict future success. So for example, if they score really high in organization, then we know that they're going to be really good at planning, anticipating, time management, etc. So that's a behavior that will predict their success on the job. So it's those three essential functions. Our clients like it too because it actually will provide interview questions for the candidate based on how that person takes the assessment. So if someone, for example, we would want an integrator, a CO number two, to be an organized individual. And so if the score is outside of those brackets, there is going to be 4 interview questions. And it's going to give you right there that you can ask that candidate, and I'll have like a little bit of a response guide too to see if that candidate is within range. So our clients love it because they feel like they're expert interviewers.
What, let's take that example of where somebody's outside the
Mhm.
recommended benchmarks. Or like, how would you ask questions that might, even though they're outside the benchmarks, that might put them back in? I mean, what kind of response might put somebody back into where they fell outside the parameters?
Yeah, so we would ask a question about their have they ever procrastinated, or where do they tend to procrastinate, right? And so the candidate be like, how did you know I procrastinate? We actually can tell based on their scores. So it's pretty insightful. Yeah.
So the way that they might get back in might be like, well, where I procrastinate is something that's maybe less relevant to the job, and that's how they could get back in. Is that?
Yeah, or they're like, you know what? I procrastinate when it comes to doing laundry at my house. I just cannot stand doing laundry, but on the job, in my day to day, I get things done. I use a time management system. So, you're really looking for specific examples, and you want to see if that's accurate based on the assessment.
Right. Right. Very interesting. And is there like one profile that is going to apply to any candidate for any role, or how do you differentiate what profile is ideal or what the proper parameters would be for a candidate to be a good candidate for different kinds of roles?
Yeah, so it's the same assessment. So, whether you're a salesperson or a CFO, you're going to take the same assessment.
Okay.
The benchmarks, so that they're scored from 1 to 9 in each of the different dimensions, and so those benchmarks, a template for that position is going to change. So, for example, if we're talking about a salesperson, we would want them to be highly communicative, outgoing, think on their feet, right? And so we want to, those scores would be different. That template would be different than a CFO, which we'd want high attention to detail, a little bit more introverted. They're much happier staying behind a desk as opposed to being out and about. So we would see different benchmarks. So that
Hmm.
this person that scores high in the sales is not going to score as high as CFO and vice versa.
Hmm. And is there sort of like standard benchmarks for the tip for different kinds of roles? Is it specific to the employer? Like, how does that work?
Yeah,
When you're, because I know you're a recruiting firm, right? So you help with
yeah.
recruiting, and you do these. I mean, you could do the assessment as a separate standalone, which is what I did with you guys. But
Mhm.
but I know you're also a recruiting firm, so, or
Yeah.
I should say executive search firm.
Mhm.
So how does that work?
Yeah, so we use it in our process. And so if a client is working with us, we'll start with several dozen candidates, narrow them down through interviews, and then the assessment. And now if a client, maybe they're hiring themselves, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's an internal promotion, then they'll take the assessment, or have the candidate
Mhm.
take the assessment. So we recommend having the candidate, your top 2 or 3 candidates take the assessment.
Right. And how do you determine what the thresholds are for each kind of role? For
Yeah.
the CFO versus sales, is that standard? Is that based on the employer?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Yeah. So those are, it's a historical database. So there's been about 5 million assessments. And based on those assessments, there's 300 different positions. We have benchmarks for each of those positions. So we know
Hmm.
what an outside salesperson should be, what an integrator should be, where a controller should be at marketing, inside sales. So we have standard benchmarks. Now we would customize them based on the client and their needs. So a quick example here is we got to work
Hmm.
with an engineering company, and they had their clients were the big 3 automakers in Detroit, and their engineers would work 16-hour days, anywhere between 3 weeks to 3 months long at the location. So they would have a trailer outside the plant, and they would be working all day, in the plant. And the standard engineer, so we measure, one of the areas we measure is sub-1 sensitivity. So a standard engineer would have a middle sensitivity, not super sensitive, but not super thick-skinned. Uh,
What do you mean sensitivity?
so we measure someone's orientation towards, how thick their skin is. So someone in
Mm.
marketing, we want them to have a high empathy, right? We want them to know the needs of the customer. Where, in this case, this engineering company, we wanted them to be really thick-skinned because they would not last, if they were thin-skinned like me. I'm thin-skinned. Most visionaries are sensitive because we know what the needs of the clients are. And so we want to create something that is going to serve our clients. And so that's our superpower. So someone like me would not have lasted in that environment where I was working 16-hour days in a plant for, away from my family for 3 months on end.
Mm.
So yeah.
Which are salespeople, since we want to have low empathy because they need to have a high tolerance for rejection.
Yeah, right. Yeah, someone that's spot on. Yeah, someone that they're smiling and dialing. They're doing tons of outbound sales. Yes, they need to have super thick skinned, right? They can take rejection super well. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. hiring therapists for my team of therapists. We probably don't want that profile. The super interesting. All right, so now that we set that table a little bit, I guess what I'm really hoping to get into, because number two leaders, I mean, it's a big focus of yours. You literally wrote a book called Hiring Your Right Number Two Leader. Obviously, my firm, Wolf's Edge Integrators, is focused on a team of fractional number two leaders. And so we're very focused on, having the right number two leaders on our team, on having the right matching between what kind of number two leader our clients need, what kind of number two leader our team members are, what kind of number two leader our potential candidates are who are thinking of having joined the team. And so it's, this sort of profiling is really, really interesting to me. And one of the things that we were looking forward to talking through in this conversation and on this podcast is about the types of number two leaders, because one of the discoveries that we have made over the last several years, and we didn't start off knowing this, right? We started off really thinking and believing that there's sort of like one profile for the number two leader, and there's sort of one type of number two leader. Now there's all different, there's 100 different colors and variations of individual compatibility, industry experience. There's all kinds of nuance that comes into play when we want to have a matching between a particular number two leader and a particular business owner, but or CEO. But what we and some of the advantages that we had and some of the experience that our team members had, we looked at not as being a different type of number two leader than somebody else. We looked at it as differentiators in the marketplace. Oh, these are our differentiators. But what we realized is that this is, the profile that we were going for and that we were thinking of as a differentiator was really not, I mean, it was a differentiator, but it wasn't just that. It was also a certain type that some business owners need, but it was not the type that other business owners need. And so it was not a differentiator, it was a disadvantage, right? When it comes to certain types of client engagements and certain types of client needs. And it was this frustration, I guess, and this sort of confusion of this mindset of having, number two leader or integrator, there's one concept for that. And, we realized, no, there's actually, as we dove into it and investigated, we realized that there's three main types of number two leader that we've been articulating, that, that we're talking to you and many others about. Hopefully I think there are some others that are adopting it, this language and this articulation of what are the three types of number two leaders. And so anybody following me or the podcast or our website or Wolf's Edge may have heard of this already. And those three types we call operational, conductor, and executive. And so I want to dive in together in a minute to see, hey, what is the different tip profile, or what is the different background or benchmarks that might apply for the ideal operational integrator, the ideal conductor integrator or number two leader, and the ideal executive number two leader or COO. Sorry, I know we keep switching back and forth between the terminology. Just different people use different terminology. Sometimes it's integrator, sometimes it's COO, sometimes it's general manager. Just as you did in your book, let's stick with the term number two leader, so we don't have to keep
That sounds good. Yeah, sounds good.
using multiple terminologies.
Yeah.
Everyone can
There's like
understand that's what we mean.
37 titles for that role.
Yeah,
So.
second in command, whatever. So we'll call it a number two leader or just a number two. So so what we've discovered is that the operational number two leader type is somebody that's much more focused on setting up initially the systems and operations, setting up the operation, right? Getting that's why we call it operational, right? Because they're coming into an environment usually where there's really no written processes. Everything's in somebody's head, whether it's the owner's head, whether it's a team member's heads. And really setting up operations, taking charge of that, setting that up. Sometimes it's a smaller business, so they're really setting up their first leadership team. Maybe they have one person that might be considered the leadership team, maybe one or two outside the owner. And so really setting up that initial leadership team, setting up their operation, getting things into a way where there's a repeatable process and things can be done, and the experience of the clients or customers of the product or service that the company provides can be more consistent and be less stressful. And instead of thinking about getting new clients and making new sales as being an extremely stressful proposition because, oh my gosh, we're barely staying above water delivering on our current clientele. How are we going to do even more if we make another big sale? So it actually becomes all this is more fun, right? Making more money, more profit, because we have a more reliable product or service, a more reliable operation. That's kind of a focus there. We find that the conductor number two leader is that think of that image of a conductor of an orchestra, right? They're able to take an existing leadership team. It might be somewhat underperforming and help elevate those people to be people who fully own their functions of the business now. That might be filling in certain gaps on the leadership team, maybe where there's a role that was not done by anybody, and filling in those roles, ensuring that they can be like the conductor of an orchestra, that making sure that all the functions and the departments within the business are playing off the same piece of sheet music, playing at the same tempo, the right tempo, and that everybody's efforts are coordinated with each other, that marketing leads smoothly into sales, which leads smoothly into operations, which leads smoothly into finance, and ensuring that the major cross-functional projects that are going to make the business better or bigger in the future are kind of all coordinated and everybody's efforts are coordinated towards common goals. That's that conductor. And then executive is somebody I would say that is a number two leader that is an expert in and already has built large enterprises, has built businesses into a major state of scale. So that's a good fit for either already pretty large enterprises or for ones that maybe they're currently very small, but they have a very fast goal of how they want to scale. And they need someone who's actually done that before to help lead them through it and not have to figure it out for the first time. Because the reality is, that most of us entrepreneurial business owners, the business that we're running now is the largest that we've ever run. We don't really know from personal experience what that next phase looks like, what that 10x or even that 2x looks like. The leadership team members that we have on board, they usually most of the time have grown up with us. And the department that they're leading in the business is the largest department in the largest business that they've ever led before. They don't know what their current phase really needs to look like, or much less the next phase. And so these types of number two leaders are able to help them get where they need to go. So with all of that background, right, that's really, more for the listeners and viewers than for you, because you're already aware of these three types. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like how does the profile, how does the data fit into these maybe different profiles that might apply for different types of number two leaders, which different businesses will need a different one of, depending on where they are and where they want to get to and how fast.
Yeah. And Ben, I think it's awesome that you have categorized these as three different ones, because it's very simple to understand, and everyone can be on the same page in terms of who you need. So with an operational one, you would want someone with mid-level mental aptitudes. So average college degree is mid-level. So mid to upper mid-level mental aptitudes. And you wouldn't want someone too low, right, in terms of like mental acuity, because they're more of a hands-on learner. They learn by doing. So here, this number two is coming into a new environment. So they're going to have some good critical thinking ability. They have to problem solve. They have to be able to anticipate, think ahead. We wouldn't want them too high in the very top tier, in the top 3%, the top 10%, because it may not be enough of a challenge for them and they would become bored. And so, so you'd want someone in the middle. They could become really, really impatient with the team, because, someone with and we measure it on a 1 and 9 scale. So someone with an 8 or 9, they're going 100 miles an hour. And maybe they're working with a team that's going 30 to 40 miles an hour. And so, that gap is significant. So if we found someone in that, 50 to 70 miles an hour, that would be ample enough to get the job done. So that would be number one.
Okay.
We would want them to have a good attention to detail. So this person would, they would need to obsess about detail and metrics and KPIs and scoreboard numbers, financials in place. So they would have to have a high attention to detail. So that's on the mental aptitudes for the operational number two. That's what we'd want to see. on the personality side, we would want to have a mid-level of organization and process orientation. So one of the things that I have found in the 10 years now working with integrators and companies running on EOS and number twos is that I found that the smaller the company, the lower the process orientation we want. So think process orientation. On one side, you have
Mm,
someone who is very flexible, very creative. So a lot of
mhm.
visionaries, entrepreneurs. And the other side, you have someone who's very structured, um, very systematic.
Would you
And
say
so
rigid?
rigid, yes, rigid. And so if you put someone who's highly rigid, if they're a 9 in rigidity, and you put them with a small and growing entrepreneurial company, there's going to be a lot of problem, right? So
Yeah.
think someone who's worked at Honda of America or BMW, and it's just process. Think engineers. They are not going to. That mindset is not going to work in a very
All right.
young and growing company, right? Where you have
It's
that
funny.
yeah.
I had a, it's funny. I had a discovery call with a potential client yesterday, and she had told me about a particular member of her team that she said that they needed it was a medical related business, and she said, oh, this particular patient, they need this particular test done, and then the person said, no, I'm sorry, we can't, said to the doctor, no, we can't do that, that's not on the SOPs. And whatever, the SOPs had been developed very reactively. It's like, oh, there was this problem, so we created an SOP. And so it didn't even handle all of the situations that were necessary, including this one, where this particular test was needed, but there was just no SOP for that. So we don't, we can't do that. That was the response. We can't do that. Sorry, go ahead. Just reminded me of that story I only heard yesterday.
Well, I mean, individuals who are highly process oriented, I mean, if it's not part of the process, they won't do it, right? And uh, so that I mean, so organization and process orientation um, are impactful. We would also want them, these individuals, to have people skills where they have a reasonable amount of empathy for others. They're not highly assertive. They're mid-range. They're
Hmm.
not very just collaborative and afraid of confrontation, but not super assertive. They're right in the middle
Hmm.
on that. So we'd want to see those type of skills where because they're
So
working
to
with
bring
people.
people along and not steamroll them on the other
Yeah,
hand either.
yeah. Get buy-in, but then, strong enough to make a decision, saying, okay, thanks for your input. Here's where we got to go. Here's the direction. So that's with operational. And, so if we go over towards the conductor, and I would say the majority of our full-time number two leaders that we hire are in this conductor category. And
Yeah.
it's a great analogy where everyone is playing the same sheet music, and I was listening to John Williams and Star Wars recently, and I saw a documentary. I was just blown away, how he got all those musicians in sync, and that's a true conductor. And so this one we would want to see higher mental aptitude. So I would want to
Hmm.
see mental acuity that is in that 6 to 9 range, so in that upper
Mm. Okay.
echelon. So these companies are going to be a little bit larger in size. They're going to have more problems, and so you would want to see that integrator there. It's one of our indispensable traits, Ben. And when we look for an integrator, we want them to have a higher mental acuity. So they have really good strategic thinking, problem solving, critical thinking. They can look ahead and around the corner. We still want them to have high attention to detail as well, because they're going to be in the weeds. A lot of times they're going to be in those financials, really looking at to make sure that the financials are correct, the scorecards are correct, the teams all are reporting the right numbers, so that's important. Now, we would want to see, in terms of organization and process orientation, we would want them to see a little bit higher, a little bit more organized, a little bit more process oriented than the operational. Um,
Because the
So,
business is getting a little bigger at this point, so
yes.
we're going to need to be a little bit, not maybe completely rigid, but a little bit more on the rigid side relative to the operational, which is often a much smaller operation.
Right, right. So the business at this point, they do have systems and processes. They may not have the right ones where, someone that's in the operational side of it, they may not have any systems and processes or they're very loose, right?
Right.
So, and then again, we want them to have really good people skills. I would want to see a little bit more assertiveness in this role. But again, they got to be able to communicate well. They have to be able to lead and manage and hold people accountable. We want them to have people skills. We don't want someone that is super direct, super thick-skinned, super assertive, because that's my way or the highway, and they're gonna have trouble with retention.
Hmm.
People may leave. So that's what we'd want to see for that conductor level, and from a broad overview on our tip assessment.
Okay, interesting. Can you say more about what you mean by that last piece about not being overly assertive? What are the two sides of that spectrum?
Yeah. So on the assertive side, you have one that's like authoritative on one side, and the other side is someone who's very collaborative. Okay, so
Mm,
someone who scores a 1, 2, or 3 on that side, they're lower in that. So they're more collaborative. They're more of a team player. Office support people. They have these scores here. You'd want to have your office assistant, office support here. Sometimes visionaries are down here. Sometimes visionaries are not highly assertive. They're more collaborative. And
that's
so,
why they hate hard conversations
yeah,
oftentimes.
they hate hard conversation, and that has to do too with their sensitivity, right? So, visionaries have more empathy and sensitivity, and so it's hard for them to have tough conversations. On the other side, you have someone who's highly assertive, and so, it's my way or the highway, right? So it's
So
um,
where does that integrator, where should that ideal integrator
right
profile,
in the
as
middle.
you said
You would
before?
want right in the middle. Yep.
And
So
what
if
about operational? Is that similar or different?
operational would be middle, but even a little bit lower than middle would be fine. So on a 1 to 9
Hmm.
scale, ideally it would be in that 4 to 6 range for both of them, right?
Hmm.
So
Okay.
now the executive, which we haven't talked about yet, that executive I would want to be in that 6 to 7 range. I would want them to be much more assertive. They're
Hmm.
they're driving. They need to make decisions. They're on a mission to grow that company. And so I'd want them to be more assertive.
Hmm. And what other differences might you see between the executive and the other types?
Yeah, so the executive, very high mental aptitudes, so in that 7 to 9 range. I would want their energy to be really high. So I'd want that executive to have a really good drive. So we haven't talked about energy, but I would want their energy, they're think of like an internal motor that just goes, right? So, you know, uh, they're just, they're just in charge. They have, they're like the Energizer Bunny. They have really good batteries. And so you'd want that there. And then something else we haven't talked about is we have a motivation score. So on the motivation score, on one side you have someone who's very security oriented, and the other side you have someone who's risk oriented. Okay, so
Mm.
entrepreneurs, um, 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs score very high on the risk side. They're willing to take risk. Um,
And
CFO,
I'm sorry, which role would be high in risk?
entrepreneurs,
Okay.
entrepreneurs and salespeople are often higher on that risk score, where controllers, bookkeepers, office assistants are more on that security side. So for the executive one, I would want to see high in the motivation score. I would want to have that individual to, they're driven, they're going to hit that goal, they're going to really want to scale that business. They're willing to do the hard work for the reward later. So I'd want to see more of that. So they're just more of a driver with that energy and that motivation.
And what would that energy and motivation be on the operational and conductor, do you think?
They would be right in the middle. Yeah.
Hmm.
So mid-level energy.
Executive much more on the high end,
Yeah.
on the driving as if by a motor, It's funny on the ADHD test that they give kids. One of the questions they ask is, driven as if by a motor. That's one of the descriptions of
Yeah, yeah.
people with ADHD. But that's yeah, that's that. I actually spoke with I actually had breakfast or coffee this morning with a COO of a engineering firm, and he is a non-engineer who's a COO of a engineer firm, and he, one of his challenges with the partners and the other equity holders is that they're risk averse. So there's like great things that he wants to accomplish. He's like driven to start a new type of product or service, recognize the changes in the marketplace. There's this move towards design build instead of just design, and then we're getting left behind. And so there's, oh no, there's just, no, we can't. There's just all this resistance, even though people can see. I mean, that they're aware of the writing on the wall. They're aware of some of the risks in this truck that's like coming towards them on the highway of life and business. But very hard to start a new endeavor, a new initiative. Just very hard for them to like get everybody on board to this initiative. So it's yeah, definitely there's definitely going to be some profiles that are a lot more risk averse. And if you want to achieve big things, you want to be with that visionary, that CEO. I mean, you have to be able to. It also occurs to me that the mental acuity, which you talked about in the conductor and the executive, being on the much higher end, relative to what might be fully necessary on the conductor side, which maybe is more in the middle, is because like a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, visionaries are fast. Like they're just fast thinkers, not just fast doers. Not just higher risk tolerance, also just fast thinkers. And if somebody can't keep up with them, they're going to get very frustrated very fast if they can't keep up. I remember the founder that I actually grew up with, flaming visionary, founder that I sort of grew up in, kind of helping him build his business, was, I mean, extremely intelligent, extremely fast. It's very fast for me too. But, I was one of the few people that could like keep up. Like I understood what he was saying. Ask a few questions maybe, but I understood what he was saying. I could keep up, I could process and categorize, the things he wanted to do, his ideas. But yeah, without that, it'd be very tough. I mean, there were other leadership team members that didn't last very long because they just didn't have the mental speed to they don't have to be on his level, but at least enough to keep up, close enough.
Yep. And we've noticed a lot of visionaries, they have that higher mental acuity and they also have a low organization. So
Yeah.
you think about their brain is going so fast, but they don't know how to sort that in their mind. And so it's hard for people to keep up because, they're all over the place, right? So, but they're really good at thinking on their feet too, right? So they don't have a plan going in. So it's really good that they're not as organized because they can think on their feet. So
Right.
I'm talking about myself as well. So I'm not super organized, Yeah.
Let me ask you like a side question, but it's somewhat related to what you're talking about now, which is, one of the things I've noticed about entrepreneurs, visionaries, is that they have like blinders on, like a laser focus on whatever it is that they're focused on right now. Like either their new idea, or even if it's not a new idea, it's just one aspect of the business at a time. But whatever it is that they're thinking about, I've noticed like a blinder effect where all they could see is the one thing they're thinking about, and they're completely blind. And I see it as a double-edged sword, as both a superpower and a deficit. That's why they're so successful. That's why they're so brilliant, is because they can just come up with ideas, understand things, notice problems, so much better than anybody else who just doesn't go anywhere near in the depth of understanding that thing that they're laser focused on like they are. So that's a superpower.
Right.
But on the deficit side, what I've seen, coming more from an integrator perspective now, but what I've seen on the deficit side is that they're so blinders on, laser focused on one thing at a time, that they are just completely blind to everything else. And so they'll want to make a decision, like they'll want to make a decision or choose a course of action just based on that one thing, completely ignoring all of the ripple effects, all of
Mhm.
the after effects, all of the preconditions, all of the all, all of the ripples in other parts of the business and what's going to be necessary. And well, this is a dependency on that, which is a dependency on that, which is a dependency on that. And so, I could see on this some particular idea, let's say, I could see the 6 months of work by 8 people that's necessary to do this one thing. Is like, what do you mean? That's just going to take 5 minutes. It's very easy because all they're thinking about is the one thing.
So,
And
yeah.
what's that?
It's so true. It's so true. Yeah. I'm laughing myself because I've been there too myself, you know. I'm like, what do you mean it's going to take us months? Let's get it done. I'll order some Chinese. We'll crank it out this evening, you know. Yeah.
So, does that element of ability to laser focus versus ability to see kind of a much broader picture, pattern recognition, preconditions, after effects, ripples, like, you know, I don't know if you call it a broader perspective. I'm not sure what language to use, but do you see that having any differentiator? Where would that fit into the tip assessment? Would that make any difference? Let's say we're not talking about the entrepreneur right now, right? We're talking about the number two leader.
Yeah.
So is there any difference in that sort of quality between operational conductor executive?
Hmm.
Where would that, if anywhere, fit into the things that the tip assessment is measuring?
I think, um, kind of what you're talking about is we talk about that. We're calling it sensitivity on the tip. And so it's someone's empathy, it's their ability to see the needs of the customer. And you combine that with high motivation so that if you have a visionary who is sensitive to the clients, they're sensitive to the mission of the organization and the BHAG, their 3-year picture, and they're highly motivated, they're on a beeline, right? So a really good number two leader is going to be very good at helping that visionary shift their sensitivity to other things, or other things that matter. So, for example, visionaries can be, when it comes to employees that are legacy employees or just employees in general, they're very loyal. Like, visionaries love their people, generally speaking, and they will often they'll they will often not address some behavior issues or talk to people about performance. They don't want to fire anybody, because they're sensitive to that employee, that loyalty. And so really good number two is going to say, okay, what is best for the business? What is best for this business? Is it best to keep, Alec on the team?
So is
If
that like a low sensitivity that would lead
yeah,
to that?
yeah.
Lower,
So
at least.
yeah, so it's when I say low, it means that they're sensitive. So it's a 1 to 9 score. So someone who's a 1, 2, or 3 are
Oh,
sensitive.
so it's a higher score, less on the sensitivity side, at
Yeah, so
least for
they're
the number two leader.
right. So the number two is going to be in that mid range, on that sensitivity scale. So they're probably going to be 5 or 6 on a scale of 1 to 9, ideally. So a good number two is going to
So less
shift their.
empathetic than the entrepreneur.
Yeah, right. They're going to think objective, and I admire my number two. I told him he can almost be a judge in a courtroom, right? Like, he just can make a decision based on facts and be super objective, right? Where I would be a horrible judge because I would just my empathy. I don't know if it go for the plaintiff or the defendant, but I wouldn't be able to be a great judge or a great referee on the soccer field. So that's where a good number two leader can say, okay, what is this best for the business? If we are allowing Alec to have this behavior in the office, how is that impacting others? What kind of precedent are we setting? How is that impacting your culture for the long term? So creating this, really good questions and having that visionary shift their sensitivity to what needs to be shifted to. That's how a good number two leader is successful.
Hmm. Nice. And yeah, that's very helpful. What you know, this is a very interesting discussion, right? In terms of understanding like what are the differences and similarities between the profile of an ideal number two leader, whether that's conductor, executive, operational, and where can people go to learn more about VisionSpark and obviously the executive recruiting services, or the tip assessment? Where can people learn to more about that?
Yeah. So our website has it all. So visionsparksearch.com has it all.
Hmm.
So that has information about our number two leader search, as well as our search process for hiring other key leaders. And it has information about our tip assessment. If they want to go straight to the website for the tip, they can just go to talentimpactprofile.com, and that will just be about the tip, or you can go through the VisionSpark main page and click on one of the sublinks to get to the tip assessment.
Okay, awesome. Visionsparksearch.com. Alec Broadfoot, author of Hiring Your Right Number Two Leader, founder and CEO of VisionSpark. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for looking into this, for doing some thinking on this. I think that we talked before we started recording today that we're going to even do some more deeper research and testing on the different benchmarks that might apply for the different three number two leader types. So I look forward to continuing to explore this together. But thank you for making the time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and research.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Ben. It's great being here.
Awesome. Visionsparksearch.com. Everybody else, thank you for being here, and we'll see you on the other side. Appreciate it.